I had to come back to this. They have convinced me that I need to tell some of the Jamie stories associated with these guns. I'm sure if any of you know me, you probably heard stories about me shooting or whatnot. Uh, you know, shooting the head off a dragonfly and calling it a blackbird at 80 yards with a Colt Dragoon, Captain Ball revolver, all kind of stories running around about my shooting. And so I'm gonna tell you some funny stories associated with my first three. I guess we'll start with this one first. Like I said, this was my first one, and this was my general woods gun, fishing gun, hunting gun. If I was out banging around in the woods or at the ponds or something fishing, this is one I always had. This is the one that I happened to have on when my buddy Mike Scott and Greg Dow and I went fishing at Buddy Bright's pond one day, Buddy and Doris's pond. And it was getting about dark. We were just about ready to leave, and believe it or not, Mike Scott snags a big snapping turtle. And he had a broken back minnow on there, and he snagged this snapping turtle in the back of the head, and he's bringing it in. Of course, the turtle's not extremely happy about it. And he said, "That's a brand new broken back minnow." He said, "I hate to lose that thing." And I said, "I'll get it for you." And I snatched this out of the holster. And he said, "Don't shoot my new lure." And I just snatched this out, and I fired a double action shot. Actually hit the turtle in the head. didn't put a scratch on that new lure. And I was bragging about that shot as we were leaving Buddy and Doris's. We pulled out to Ebenezer and made that left there to come back to Troy. And no sooner than we turned the corner, now it was darn near plumb dark at this point. Mike said, "Well, if you're so good, shoot that possum. There's possums run across the road in front of us." And he just locked up the brakes and slid that truck sideways. Well, no sooner than he said it, I jumped up, opened the door, never put my feet on the ground, just stood up in the floorboard of the truck and shot that possum as it's running across the road. And it had got about halfway up a hill, and when I shot it, it just rolled back down to the road. And all the laughing stopped then, all the teasing. They figured I was pretty good with it. Some funny stories about this one. All right, first about the bobbed hammer. Didn't actually set out to make this gun a bobbed hammer. I had thought about it, but because it had such a wonderful trigger pull. But I kind of hated to mess up its factory configuration. Well, my lifelong buddy, George Akers, he got a job working for Murray Guard. And he was, I can't even remember the place where he was night watchman at, but it was over there in Fulton. And might have been Ferry Morris. It seems to me like maybe that's what it was. And one of the guards over there told him when he come, he said, "Man, you ain't working over here without a gun, are you?" And George said, "Well, you know, I ain't done any of the paperwork to carry a gun. I'm unarmed security." He said, "Look here, you don't need to be working over here without a gun." So George come to me. And of course, now let me just go ahead and say, George is a notorious shot with a rifle. He's rather infamous of a shot with a pistol. In other words, if his life depended on it, George couldn't shoot a pistol very good. But he come to me. He says, they tell me I'm a fool for working down there without having a gun. So you got something I can use? I said, yeah, boy, I got the perfect thing. I said, I even got you a right-handed holster you can wear on your belt. So I loaned him this gun. And George got to where he's making his night rounds. He found a quick way to make his rounds every hour or so around that warehouse. He'd unplug him a pallet jack. He'd get up on that pallet jack. He'd stand on the forks and he would steer that thing like this. And boy, he could make a round around that warehouse pretty quick. Well, this one particular night, he's going to make his rounds. He's got my pistol in his holster. And he gets up on that pallet jack and he goes cruising around that warehouse. And the first turn he makes, he swings kind of wide so he can make that turn with a little speed. The power cord to recharge the pallet jack came off of where he had it hung and swung down when he made that wide turn. And it got under the back wheel of that pallet jack, and it throwed him off of it. And he said he hit the ground, and no sooner than he hit the ground, said he saw sparks flying where this thing had come out of the holster. And it actually broke off a little bit of the hammer. So that's why, like I said, I can't remember. It seemed like it was maybe 85, 86. I just went ahead and took the hammer spur off. This is also the 38 where I tell the story about cleaning it for Mary. And every once in a while, I just get her gun out of her purse. When we lived in Nashville, of course, there wasn't no such thing as a gun permit. So we were carrying illegally, which I did all my life until about 1994. Every once in a while, I'd get her gun out of her purse, and I'd take it out, and I'd make sure it's clean, make sure ammo looked good in it. I got it out of her purse, and she said that she was going to run up to the store. So I said, well, while you're gone, I'll go ahead and clean your gun for you. She said, okay. So I go sit down. At that time, we lived in an apartment near Percy Priest, just a one-bedroom apartment, Percy Priest Lake, and there in Antioch. And I went to open the action of this, and I pushed, and I was trying to get that cylinder out, and it absolutely would not come. And I thought, what in the world is wrong with this thing? Now it's fully loaded. And I take my hand away, and I notice there's a real gummy substance on here. I thought, what in the world? So I took a smell, and it was dehydrated, super concentrated Mountain Dew. She had spilled Mountain Dew, and some of it in the car, and some of it had got in her purse, and it literally froze the gun up. I mean, if she'd needed to pull the trigger, there's no way in the world she would have been able to pull that trigger. So I had to run a sink full of hot soapy water and just basically throw the gun in there and let it soak for a minute before I could get that off of there. And it's a good thing it's nickel, because if it weren't, that Mountain Dew probably rusted it to pieces. But that's the gun. This is also the gun that I said I let Mom use for a long time. And then when I got married and moved to Nashville, I wanted this gun for Mary to carry. Mom didn't want to give this up. She said, that's the, out of all the guns, that's the only one I like. And I said, well, Mom, you have to get Dad to get you one. So Dad got her one, and she just never liked it. And this is the one she always says is her favorite. She's trying to talk me out of it all the time. All right, the 45. I've got some good stories about this, but probably the best one is when Donnie Hobbs moved to Tennessee to play bass for me. Of course, Donnie was raised in a home. There weren't any guns in the home. You know, he's from Detroit, and he just, you know, it's just something they didn't do. And he knew enough about me to know that, I mean, the first night he ever met me, we were in his truck, cruising around Plymouth, Michigan, and had a truckload of people in the back of his truck. This is when you could do that and not get arrested, provided you were doing it nicely. And we got pulled over in Plymouth, and as the guy's pulling us over, Don has the windows in the back where you could open it up, sliding glass windows, and they were opening. And Greg Perlongo says, he's scared to death. He's never been pulled over before. And he said, and he don't think we're supposed to have people in the back of the truck. I said, forget about the people in the back of the truck. I said, they find this 38 in my boot, we're all going to jail. That didn't do anything to help his nervousness any. But when he first moved down, like one of the first nights, when I had a band, we all slept in the same room. We had mattresses in the floor, and you like crawled to wherever you could, and you just crashed. And Donnie was going off to go to bed, and came back out to the living room, and he said, I'm not going in there. And my brother David says, why? And he says, I opened that door to get into bed, and he said, your brother's asleep in there. And he said, and he's got that damn gun in his hand. So I had fallen asleep face down, and I was laying there, and I had this gun laying out beside me in my left hand. And my brother said, well, let me go see. So he goes in there, and he eases open the door, and he looks, and he said, you're okay, the hammer's not back. He said, Don said, what's that mean? He said, well, if he had a round in the chamber, the hammer would be back and the safety would be on. He said, the hammer's down, so that means he unloaded it before he went to bed. Let the hammer down. Still didn't convince Don. So David finally hollers, hey, Bub. I'm like, what? And he said, Donnie's coming to bed, don't shoot him. I said, tell him to come on. So that's a funny story associated with the 45. This is also the one that I shot the cottonmouth with. It was coming at full speed off the hill. And 3 shots, double action. Didn't even more than just clear the holster, because the snake was, I mean, it was already to me. I had a shotgun laying on the ground, but when I heard the leaves rattling and saw the cottonmouth, the shotgun was on the ground. I went to get it. Well, the cottonmouth kind of stopped. And I thought, all right, this is going to work. So I went to stoop a little more to get that. And man, that cottonmouth come flying off that hill. Well, I just snatched this out of my holster. I fired 3 shots, double action, just as fast as I could pull the trigger. And I don't even really remember aiming, but literally cut the cottonmouth into 4 pieces because I hit him with all 3 shots. So all of these guns, just being because they were my first, and I probably shot them up, besides my Glock 17, which I would get in the early 90s. These right here, I've shot more than probably any others that I own. And so that's some of the good stories associated with these guns. And I'm sure there's more, but they said, well, you know, you got to tell the story why you bobbed the hammer on the gun, about George getting thrown off the pallet jack. So I figured I'd tell a little story about all 3 of them. So You may have heard other stories. If you have, put a comment down there and ask me about it, and we'll talk about it in the next video. Hey, thanks for y'all checking in.